Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. I'm Jim Van Epps, the president of the Savannah Council. It's my privilege, and our host for this evening's program. This evening, the program is entitled Searching for Energy Security, and a topic we haven't touched on previously. And our speaker tonight is Douglas Hengel, certainly qualified to help us learn more about this very important topic, and I'll get to that in his background in just a second. Two important points before Doug's presentation. First, our annual meeting is our next meeting, and that will be held here on January 19th at our usual time of 7:30. This is an important meeting for us when we will vote for new board members to replace those that are moving off the board because of term limits. It's important to have a good turnout to validate the election. You've heard a lot about that lately, but we need a certain number of members here in order to validate. So please plan to attend that evening. Next, our sponsors for this evening, you've seen before, and that's Kreitz Auto Group, which is striving to provide the highest standard of excellence of automotive excellence in Savannah and the Coastal Empire for 80 years, and we're very grateful to Kreitz, a long-serving sponsor, a platinum sponsor of the Savannah Council. Morrison Templeton is an insurance company and an independent agency that since 1981 has proudly offered personal advice on car, house, business, and not only house, but high-value home insurance to clients in the communities surrounding Savannah, Atlanta, and Hilton Head. Thank you, Morrison Templeton. And third is Daily Chatter, and I hope you're familiar with Daily Chatter. It's an international email newsletter exclusively focused on world news that our members receive daily. Most days, it's the first email I read, frankly, and I finish reading it in about 5 minutes on the 5 top issues that the newsletter presents that day. If you don't already get it, please let me know so we can get you linked up to receive it. Interesting, but thank you, Daily Chatter. Savannah Council could not serve this community without the support of our sponsors. Our speaker this evening is Douglas Hengel, a former American diplomat who's worked extensively on global economic and energy issues, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy, Sanctions and Commodities. In that capacity, his responsibilities included formulating and advancing United States international energy policy and being a member of the governing board of the International Energy Agency. Mr. Hengel served at U.S. embassies in, listen to this, Rome, Bratislava, Prague, Lima, and Caracas, in addition to a variety of assignments in Washington, D.C. Currently, he teaches the Geopolitics of Energy at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, and he's a visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Now, on his topic. The world, as you probably read if you saw the abstract, is in the midst of the most severe energy crisis since the Arab Oil Embargo of the 1970s. We all remember that. Energy security has returned to the center of the global energy agenda. How will countries meet their energy needs going forward with prices at such high levels? Will the shock waves from Russia's invasion of the Ukraine accelerate or slow the transition to cleaner energy to address climate change? How might global geopolitics be impacted by this energy crisis? Will the energy transition mean new vulnerabilities related to critical minerals and clean energy supply chains? So these are some important questions that I too have. I didn't formulate them, Doug did. But so please please join me in welcoming this evening to the podium, Doug Hengel.
Okay. This seems to work now? Okay. Because I like to roam around. I don't like to stand still, so if this works, this would be a little better for me. So, okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Jim and the council for inviting me here this evening, and in particular my old friend Larry Silverman for asking me to come down. My wife and I, very happy to, where'd my wife go? Very happy to be here. It's our first time in Savannah, and we're enjoying it very much. So, yeah, so we're going to talk about energy security. My background, I focus on policy issues, on the geopolitics. I'm not a technical person, so I've learned a lot, but I can't answer obscure technical questions, but I'm happy to try to field any questions you have. And as we go along, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. If it's a question I'd rather discuss at the end, I'll say that. Otherwise, I'll try to answer it right away. So, okay. So I want to start out with a couple of slides about where we are today. I hope you can all see this. So this is, we talk a lot about, we're in an energy transition, right? Well, we've been in energy transitions for a long time. The famous author and energy guru Dan Yergin likes to say that we're in the 313th year of the energy transition. It began in January of 1709 when the world began moving from wood to coal because it enabled the metal worker to make better iron. So historically, energy transitions have taken a century or more and become more like energy additions. So at one point, oil overtook coal on a global basis, but coal has grown a lot since then. And now we're starting on an energy transition, which is driven quite a bit by politics and policy, not just by economics and technology. And we're supposed to have a radical transformation of the energy world in 30 years, which seems to be quite a big task. But what I wanted to point out here is you can see fossil fuels have traditionally been, and still are, over 80% of global energy demand. And there's a couple of little slivers on the top that are modern renewables. So today, wind energy is about 3% of global energy supply. Solar is about 1.5%. They're growing very rapidly, but from a very small base. So fossil fuels are not going to disappear anytime soon. And these additions, what's been going on here is you tend to get new fuel sources build on top of the other ones. So for an energy transition to really happen, the one we want to have to get climate change under control, not only does all of the new energy supply need to come from clean energy, but it has to start eating into the shares of coal, natural gas, and oil pretty quickly. Also, CO2 emissions, so carbon dioxide is the main cause of climate change, and they've been on a steady upward trend unless there's been some kind of economic recession disturbance of some sort. So, for example, in 2020, as COVID shut down the world, carbon dioxide emissions declined. We weren't flying, we weren't driving as much. So you see, again, I'm sorry, this pointer doesn't work well, but you can see here in 2020, the blue line going down here, emissions dropped quite a bit, but the world began to open up in 2021. They shot right back up to a new record. 2022, there will be a much smaller increase, but emissions are still increasing every year when they should be declining going forward if we're going to meet our climate goals. So what do we mean by energy security? So energy security, upper left there, you can see it's pretty important to meeting our economic security and hence our national security. And states have traditionally regarded the energy sector as a crucial component of national security and are loath to leave it completely to the market for that reason. But how you define energy security depends a bit on where you sit. So if you're a big energy consumer, you think about it as security of supply, having enough supply. If you're Saudi Arabia, you wonder if there's going to be enough demand for your oil going forward. So there are some different definitions. So most people tend to think of it as having access to sufficient energy at affordable prices. But even there, what's affordable to an American, a German, or a Japanese is different than if you're a citizen of Ghana or Ecuador or Indonesia. So a classic example on the lower left here, the 4 A's. So affordability, availability of the energy, accessibility, being able to get at it. So OPEC has something to say about whether we can actually get at all of the oil that we need. And increasingly, this issue of acceptability. So in some countries, nuclear energy is not seen favorably. It's not considered acceptable. Coal is increasingly not seen as an acceptable energy source, but again, it depends on which country you're talking about. More energy infrastructure is often not seen as acceptable either. Building power transmission is a problem in many countries. Even while solar and wind energy have been increasing rapidly, in some places there's becoming resistance to having more wind turbines in the countryside. So that's becoming an issue in some places too. So acceptability is a big issue. So here are some images. So Americans, we think of energy security. This is from the oil embargo of 1973-74. We tend to think of it as the price of gasoline. We Americans have a constitutional right to cheap gasoline. And when we don't have cheap gasoline, we're not happy. In Europe, the issue is natural gas supply, primarily. And so Vladimir Putin has had something to say about that in the past couple of years. In much of the world, it's about having just basic energy needs met, being able to have the lights on. So there's still somewhere between 750 and 800 million people that do not have any access to electricity. Most of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. On top of that, there may be another 2 billion people who have limited access to electricity. Maybe they have a couple of solar panels on their roof and they can run some lamps and charge up their phones, but that's not real modern energy access. And then increasingly, this is a little pile of lithium on the bottom right here. So we're talking about critical minerals. We're talking about things like rare earths and cobalt and things that I'll get to in a few minutes. That's another issue that's coming up in terms of energy security. So yes, we're in a global energy crisis, certainly the biggest one since the Arab Oil Embargo, maybe bigger because that was one that was really just about oil. And it was about the developed world at that time. The OECD countries, really China and India weren't so affected by that, but everybody's affected now. And these problems have been going on for basically since we started coming out of COVID. And so they predated the Russian invasion, and it means that energy security is back on the agenda everywhere. So how did we get there? Primarily coming out of COVID, big increase in energy demand rapidly. Supply didn't quite keep up. Supply chains were an issue in the energy area. Insufficient investment, which I'll talk about in a minute. There were extreme weather cases. That's becoming an increasing problem. So hydropower is a great energy resource, except when you have drought. And so in 2021, there were droughts in China, droughts in Brazil that impacted their hydroelectric production. In Europe, wind didn't blow as much in 2021. So there's a particular problem in the UK and the North Sea. So, wind we know is an intermittent source, but there can be extended periods when the wind doesn't blow very much. And if you're heavily dependent on wind power and you don't have backup for it, then that becomes a problem. And the Russians were playing games too. They began to play games with gas supply in Europe in 2021, and predating the war. And I can talk about any of those things more if you would like. But it shows that these systems that we've built up over time, these problems, which were geared primarily to addressing an oil supply crisis. We learned a lot from what happened with the Arab Oil Embargo and took steps. We built strategic petroleum reserves, that kind of thing. We know how to deal with that more or less, but now when you have all of these different problems driving up prices, not just of oil, but of natural gas and coal and electricity, that becomes a bigger challenge, and it's been affecting every country. So what have Yeah, so among these crises where China had a big power crisis in 2021, they had blackouts in parts of the country. We had, oil prices were going up, and again, since we Americans like cheap gasoline, we were pressuring OPEC to produce more oil, and I said Putin was beginning to play games with natural gas supply in Europe, and the wind turbines in parts of Europe were not blowing as much as they should be. Investment is an issue. So this chart here shows a couple of things. So the International Energy Agency in Paris has developed this scenario to get to net zero emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector by 2050. That requires a huge amount of investment in green energy, but we're down at this level. On the other hand, we're investing in oil and gas too little. If you go back before 2018, the numbers were up in the $750 to $800 billion a year range. They've been coming down. They're down at a level, if we were moving towards net zero, using much less fossil fuels, this kind of investment level would be okay, but we're not moving at that level. We're not investing this, and we're investing too little here. Hence, we've had these supply problems. Dan Yergin, again, the author in the Energy Guru, says, what we've had recently is some short-sighted policies about investment. The term he uses is preemptive underinvestment in developing new resources. So there's a lot of pressure now from some banks and others, investment funds, to invest less in fossil fuels because we have this climate problem. But if you're also not investing enough in the clean energy, then you have an issue. So let's bring Russia into the picture and what's happened this year with Ukraine. So Russia is an energy superpower. They're one of the top 3 oil producers in the world, the largest exporter of crude oil and oil products. They're the largest exporter, or were, of natural gas, a big exporter of coal. They build nuclear power plants around the world. But now, increasingly, at least some countries don't want to do business with Russia anymore. In Europe now, there's an a ban on importing Russian oil by sea. There'll be a ban on importing Russian oil products, so diesel and gasoline and other things, early next year. So the markets are getting very much disrupted. Europe is bearing the brunt of this, but it's affecting other parts of the world as well. Russia is able to, we'll see what will happen going forward. They are able to change where they send some of their oil and natural gas going to Asia, particularly China and India, but they're not going to be able to find markets for all of it, probably. But prices have been going very high. So what this shows here is back in the 1970s when we had the oil crisis in 73, 74, and then a later one at the end of the decade with the Iranian Revolution, when oil prices jumped again, where the world was spending a lot of its energy was a big part of our spending globally. And we're back at that level, in fact, maybe higher than that as a percentage of GDP in 2022. The difference here is back in these days, it was the oil price that was driving this. Now it's oil, it's natural gas, and it's coal. Everything has become more expensive, so there's like nowhere to hide. We get a little bit of benefit in the United States. Our prices haven't gone up as much here as in some countries, particularly in Europe, but also in Asia, but they've gone up everywhere. Now the oil price, actually, I just saw is down for the year. We've given up, it had gone up earlier this year and now has declined quite a bit. I noticed the gasoline prices are much less here than back at home where we are in Northern Virginia. But they're much higher globally, and this is having a big impact. So what countries are doing, particularly in Europe, is they're trying to help out businesses and people. So they're giving them tax breaks, they're giving them rebates, they're capping prices, and all of that. In fact, Europe is going to spend something like $700 billion this year on helping people cope with these high energy prices. That's money that could have been spent on energy investment or particularly clean energy, but that's just trying to help people get through this difficult period, and which is not going to end just this year. There's at least another couple of tough years ahead, I think. So what are countries doing on this? So after the blackouts in China last fall, Xi Jinping, they made this pledge to reach net zero emissions by 2060. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to abandon that, but it can't interfere with normal life. So energy security is top of the agenda there. There was just the Chinese Communist Party a few weeks ago. In his speech opening that Congress, his 2-hour speech, he devoted part of that to energy, and he said, "We will advance initiatives to reach peak carbon emissions in a well-planned and phased way in line with the principle of building the new before discarding the old." And they have been increasing their use of coal this year. President Biden decided to release 1 million barrels a day of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that we have. That was basically to try to deal with the prices having gone up so high, and I think that did have a positive impact on the price here in the United States. And Europe has a huge challenge to try to deal with greatly reduced supply of Russian gas. Europe was getting about 40% of its natural gas from Russia last year. This year it's going to be down to 10% or less. And so they're trying to find ways to save energy, advance installation of heat pumps, be more ambitious renewables targets, and bringing a lot of natural gas from other places, particularly from the United States. But and this crisis is going to go on for at least another couple of years for Europe. So switching a little bit to the clean energy side of things. Here's Dan Jurgen, who I've mentioned a couple of times already. So we're moving from a world where big oil has been the main story to, he likes to talk about big shovels. The clean energy transition means we're going to need a lot of minerals, a lot of stuff out of the ground, a lot more than we need from a fossil fuel-based energy system. You can see some of the, I hope you can read that here on the right. So these are things like lithium and graphite and cobalt for batteries, rare earths for a number of different technologies, a lot of copper, because we're going to have a world that is more electrified, and for that you need copper. And there's a real question about whether the supply can keep up with the demand here. And you can see that when you don't have enough supply, prices go up. So lithium prices went up almost 500% last year, and that's continued actually this year. So we're going to need a lot of stuff going forward. So the International Energy Agency has different sort of scenarios for, here's where we were in 2021, mineral requirements for clean technology. This is basically the path that we're on now. By 2030, it almost doubles the amount of the minerals that we need. And in a net zero scenario where we're really trying to get to net zero emissions in the energy sector by 2050, it's more than 3 times where we are today in just now 8 years. And then you can see some of the minerals here. that are critical. Nickel's another one. So it's a huge challenge because you don't open mines overnight. They take years to open, right? And a lot of the minerals are difficult to get at places. The other issue is that China dominates these supply chains. Maybe they're not the biggest miner of particular minerals, or they mine almost all of the rare earths, but they refine and process almost all of this stuff. It's a dirty job to do. The Chinese are willing to do it. A lot of countries, it's nearly impossible to get a facility open to process these minerals because of the environmental consequences. So you can see here, so they only produce 13% of the lithium, but they refine 44% of it. For batteries, the cathodes and anodes for the batteries, they're very, very dominant in those things. So manganese, nickel, so is this an energy security concern going forward? We've become less dependent on the Middle East for oil, but we become overwhelmingly dependent on China for all of these other products. Solar panels is another one. They dominate that area. So that's something that's on the minds of policymakers now, and that's why the United States and Europe in particular are spending a lot of money to try to bring supply chains for these materials into their own spheres. So under the Inflation Reduction Act that became law in this country, a lot of money is being devoted for electric vehicles and other things, but you have to build them in the United States, or at least a percentage of them, and the raw materials have to be from the United States, or at least a percentage of them, to try to bring some of those supply chains back. One thing we learned during COVID is you need to have diverse supply chains, right? And Europe is doing the same. This is causing some trade tensions, which we can get into if you would like, but there's clearly a race going on now to not have China dominate these supply chains as much as they do today. We're not going to be able to eliminate dependence on China, but to have alternatives. Yeah, so we're still in the world, I would say, of old energy. We're moving towards a world of new energy, and then how quickly is that going to happen? The International Energy Agency does, every year, they do a World Energy Outlook, which is not a strict forecast of things. They do these scenarios, and you put things like economic growth, population growth, technology change into some computer model, and it spits things out, right, based on your assumptions. And so again, we're at about 80% dependence on fossil fuels today under this particular scenario, which is where government stated policy scenario. So basically business as usual with what governments say they are going to do. You get down to 60% dependence on fossil fuels in 2050. This is not net zero. If you want a net zero scenario, basically you have to start, incredible changes to the energy mix from today. But in the meantime, you're going to have much more the share of non-fossil fuels, which is not just solar wind, it's also nuclear and some other hydro and some other things, is going to go up sharply. So are we going to be in a world where you have the energy security challenges of the old world, the fossil fuels, plus the energy security challenges of the new one? That's possible. Another one I wanted to show you, and then I think I'm going to stop, is the Norwegian company Equinor, used to be called Statoil. They also do an energy, a lot of people do energy outlooks every year, and I like theirs because they try to incorporate geopolitics. They don't just look at technology and economics, but they try to make sense of the world as it is today and what those geopolitical implications may be for the energy world going forward. So they have this year, they have two scenarios called walls and bridges. So one scenario is walls. Walls protect, but they also separate and shut us out. And so they look at current trends plus obstacles to cooperation and lack of joint solutions to common challenges, which have become greater after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the increase of geopolitical conflicts. Walls have become higher and thicker. Energy security and the desire to be less dependent on others have become more important than before and will shape development. The need for protection against others with negative intentions has become greater. So energy security is at the top of the priority list for energy. In this scenario, where they see significant changes in a sustainable direction, but not sufficient to reach climate goals. Bridges connect and enable collaboration and communication. Bridges are open and welcoming, and they see in a bridges scenario that the world, they do kind of a backward-looking thing here. If everyone cooperated, you could reach net zero by 2045 or 2050, but they say it's a very formidable challenge. So how formidable? So this was 2020 when we had COVID and sort of the world shut down. You basically have to get on that same path again for the next 30 years to get down to a net zero emissions in the energy sector. So is that very likely to happen? I would say not, without some enormous technology breakthroughs, but so walls and bridges. And we're in a scenario where the world is not all working together, right, for the common good, I would say. So people talk about, so we have these energy security challenges. Massive investment in clean energy, is that the way to go? Or do we need to while not saying we don't need more investment in clean energy, can we forget about the fossil fuels here? So fossil fuels that have gotten us to the lifestyles that we have today. So there's a debate going on about this, much more discussion about the clean energy side probably than the fossil fuel side, but we're not investing enough in either one. So what's the way ahead? Again, Equinor on the left-hand side here says we're experiencing a very clear illustration of the various dimensions of the energy trilemma, the trade-off and balance between affordable, safe, and decarbonized energy. In recent years, the center of gravity has shifted several times. So in the Paris Agreement of 2015 put decarbonization prominently on the map. After COVID and towards the last year's climate discussions in 2026, net zero became all the rage. Everyone was talking about net zero. That focus for decarbonization was further strengthened. But then COVID and bottlenecks on the supply side and Russia invading Ukraine, and now the picture has shifted very much back to a focus on security. We're worried less about decarbonization now and more on basic energy security. One of the things that's going on in Europe right now is they're supposed to be getting rid of coal. Well, they're using more coal because they need it, because they don't have enough natural gas. So where are the priorities there? So so a sustainable energy transition, they say, has to find a balance between these three different dimensions of the energy trilemma. And if you don't pay attention to energy security, you're going to have more disruptions and more turbulence, and that's probably going to make it harder to reach the climate goals. So I'd be interested in hearing any of your views on this and any questions you may have. So thank you. So how do I do this? I just call on people?
I'll tell you what, first I'd like to thank you very much for present. And I think probably the best way of doing it is for you to do it. You can just point to somebody. So a couple of us have been standing in the back, and we have decided to extend this to an 8-hour presentation. Clear things up a little bit, so. But I think the best thing to do.
Sorry, this is a very high level view. There's a lot of, energy is complicated. And so I tried to keep it at a high level, but I hope I didn't confuse too many of you.
Okay.
But the first hand I saw was over there, so let's start. Yeah.
And would you care to comment on the Keystone Pipeline and also the pipeline that's running through the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, down to Michigan, over to Sarnia, which is giving a lot of fuel to the Canadians and even in Toronto and their airport?
Doug, could you repeat the question?
Yeah.
You can capture, please.
So this is about the Keystone XL pipeline. So the Keystone XL pipeline, so there is we import a lot of energy from Canada, right? Oil and natural gas. And there was a proposal that dates back probably 15 years now to build a larger pipeline to bring oil from Canada from the oil sands in Alberta, which is oil that's basically mined. It's very thick, it's very dirty to produce oil, and to bring it down essentially to the Gulf Coast where it would be refined. Canada, friendly country, most of us think, good neighbor, secure source of energy supply, right? This became a big issue in the environmental community, feeling that if this pipeline was built, it was going to mean more production of this pretty carbon-intensive oil up in Canada. Again, it's a mining process. You have to heat it up so it'll flow through the pipes and all that. So a lot of energy is used to get this oil, out of the ground and into the market. And so environmentalists campaigned against this, and eventually the Obama administration said, no, we're not going to give it a permit to be, they had to give permits because it was going to cross the border. No, we're not going to do that. The Trump administration said, no, we're going to do this, and let it go forward again. And then the Biden administration said, no, it's over. So this gets a lot of attention as, so do we need that? The mic is not working again. So do we need that oil? The United States does not need that oil, probably. Is it, at this point, I can't imagine it's going to get revived and built. The Canadians are building a pipeline to the West Coast to export oil from there. So, I worked on this issue a while back, and the safest way to move oil around is by pipeline. And so I think we should have done it, but I think that ship has sailed. On the other pipeline, let me hold on that one. We can talk about that one afterwards. Okay, right here.
Nuclear. You may have seen the TED seminar, former global warming alarmist, who was big on windmills and solar, has concluded it's never going to ratchet up in time to feed the industrial world. And he's now on the nuclear bandwagon. France stayed the course. Germany panicked after Fukushima, and they abandoned it. Nuclear is about the cleanest energy you can have. And you talk to nuclear people, and you can store nuclear waste in a parking lot in concrete for 100 years, depending how you get documented and cranked up again. So it's a lot of the positives. Is it just a visual fear of nuclear? Why hasn't that's the most logical expansion? It's so efficient.
So, okay, this thing is still not, okay. All right, so nuclear. Nuclear is clean energy, but it's expensive energy, expensive to build nuclear power plants. I think if you look at any of these net zero scenarios, they involve a lot of renewables. They involve carbon capture, so capturing the emissions from fossil fuel production, and they involve more nuclear. How much more nuclear depends on the scenario. China's building nuclear power plants. They're the biggest builder of nuclear power plants. Russia's also building some, and there are various countries around the world that are building nuclear power plants. You have 2 that are coming online here in Georgia, right? But it's got a lot of challenges because of the acceptability issue and just the cost of building the old kind of reactors. So there's a lot of money now going into small modular reactors. People like Bill Gates and others are investing a lot in this. So these are reactors that are, maybe 10 to 20% of the size of the current big ones. And the idea is you could maybe build these things in a factory and bring them to a site, and you can, you can add on to them, and they'd be more economic. So, but that technology isn't really proven yet. None of these things have licenses. Well, there's a couple that are going to be built in the United States on sites that belong to the Department of Energy. Anyway, the commerciality of these things is still in question. We're looking at probably 2030 at the earliest. So in terms of them making a significant contribution to the energy mix going forward, it's going to be a while. The most important thing, I think, is not to shut down nuclear power plants that are working when their life can be safely extended. So that's happened here in the United States to some degree. The French are now looking at that. The Japanese just announced that they're going to try to, some plants that have 60-year life spans are going to try to increase that to 80 years. So there are ways to do this. And so the more of the nuclear that we can keep running, when you shut down a nuclear plant, what tends to happen, so New York State, they shut down Indian Point, which is north of New York City. People were concerned about the security issues. What happened was emissions for electricity production in New York went up because what did they replace it with? They replaced it with natural gas. So I'm a fan of nuclear. It has its challenges. I'll stop there on nuclear. Sorry, there was a couple of, one of the women here. Yes, please.
I was going to ask the same question, so.
Oh, okay.
You didn't address Russia in the Arctic. I understand this is a big game changer coming up, especially this last year, the announcement of new ports, new facilities for oil.
Russia and the Arctic. So, yeah, they consider that their future for oil and gas is production in the Arctic. They're going to have challenges because of the sanctions on them, and they're going to have trouble getting access to the Western technology that they need to do things in the Arctic. So they were partnering with companies like ExxonMobil and Total and others, and those companies are leaving Russia now. So that's all very much up in the air, how much of that they're going to be able to do on their own. There was yes.
A question about the large storage facilities. What capability do we have from cleaner solar, wind energy?
Okay, so we need you're asking about energy storage.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the problem, of course, with solar and wind is it's intermittent, and so what happens if, the climate conditions are not right, you don't want to have to necessarily turn on, right now you have to turn on, other power plants, basically, to make up for that. Can energy storage satisfy that need going forward? Energy storage is increasing, but basically the current technologies can last about 4 hours if you're running them flat out. Longer if you're running them not completely, but we don't have anything like long-term storage. So hydrogen could be a way to do that in the future, or there could be some other technologies too, but we don't have the kind of backup energy storage, and it fits into the scenario about the minerals. We need a lot of that for electric vehicles. We're going to need even more for energy, large-scale energy storage. So it's.
Is that being worked on?
Yeah, it's being worked on. There's a lot of, they're working on new chemistries, so use less of these critical minerals, lithium and the like. but we're some distance away, I would say, from having the kind of long-term energy storage that we need to make the system really work properly. You had your hand up here, so I'm going to.
Have you seen any studies about what the world would look like when we didn't have enough energy?
Well, I showed you that thing in Africa when they're, the light, they're not running, you don't have lights. If we didn't have enough energy, well,
You gotta run out sometime.
okay, so let's say one thing that's going on right now. So Europe, having less access to Russian natural gas, they've been going out and trying to buy any cargo of liquefied natural gas they can and bring it to Europe. So what that is means, they're taking away, so now countries that are price conscious, like Bangladesh and Pakistan, for example, don't have the access to natural gas that they had before. So if there's a supply shortfall, it's those that are able to pay more that are going to get the energy, and those that are not are going to have to find alternatives or do without. So we've been on a trend line where energy access has been improving over time. More people having access to electricity globally. This year, the trend is going in the wrong direction. The number of people without access to energy is going up, and hopefully that's going to be a one-year blip. But yeah, in the back.
There's lots of small print on your slides, and it's wonderful information. Can you share these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes. You? Sorry, you. Yes.
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen. It's going to solve all our problems.
Well, I mean, we spent all this money and the policy of making electric cars with all the minerals, all of this stuff. We got endless hydrogen.
Well,
We use it.
we don't have endless hydrogen. I think electricity has won the race for the vehicles, for at least for passenger vehicles. For the larger ones, that's still uncertain. So hydrogen, is the most common element in the universe, except it doesn't exist by itself. It exists like H2O, water, hydrogen, oxygen, and water. So hydrogen's been around for a long time. It's been used in oil refining and some other industrial processes, but it's good. It's an energy, defined as an energy carrier. You can store it for long periods of time. It's used as rocket fuel. So it can be used as an energy source, but it has to be made more cheaply than today and in large quantities for it to be useful going forward. So there's a lot of money that's being invested in it now to try to bring down the costs. I'm pretty confident that that's going to happen. The idea is to produce it using green energy, so solar, wind, maybe nuclear, but there's already a lot of competition for use of those things, so it means even more renewables have to come on the grid and run water through electrolyzers to produce the hydrogen. So I think more of that's going to happen, and it could be. Sorry, to answer your question, it could be a big help for long-distance transport, trucking. Basically, I think is where that could be. Batteries are more of a problem there because of their weight.
Right, and England tried to have hydrogen cars.
Yeah, they're very expensive, and the cost of the electric cars have been coming down. So I think that's
Right,
probably.
but if you make more hydrogen cars, the price comes down.
Yeah, I think that one's been kind of decided, but we'll see. Okay. Yes.
Is the U.S. a net exporter or importer of fossil fuels?
The U.S. is a net exporter. So we had this thing called the shale revolution. Can everybody hear me? I'm speaking. Okay. We have we had this shale revolution beginning in the first decade of this century, where we figured out with hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling how to produce a lot of first natural gas and then oil out of these rocks that are we thought were impermeable. And that's allowed. We were importing 60% of our oil in 2005 in the United States, and we were concerned. There had been periodic crises about, are we reaching peak oil supply? Is there going to be enough oil to go around? And then we cracked the code on how to get this shale gas and shale oil out of the ground. And now we've been, for the past several years, we've been a net exporter of both natural gas and oil. But even though we export oil, we're tied into the global market. So if there's not enough supply globally, the prices go up everywhere, which is why we had gasoline prices and other fuel prices, diesel even actually more than gasoline, go up here in the United States. But we are a net exporter of fossil fuels, which is, I think, a very positive development. Yes.
What about behavior change? Is there hope for that? I just moved here from Northern California, and I've already noticed a difference in awareness here.
Yeah.
And, is there a way that we can reduce our consumption through behavior change?
So the International Energy Agency will tell you that the first fuel is energy efficiency. Use what you're using more efficiently, use less of it, and we have been doing a better job. The world as a whole has been doing a better job, but there's a lot of unmet energy needs. So you have, again, these 800 million people roughly that don't have any access to electricity. A lot of people that have limited access. You have countries that are growing rapidly, people joining the middle class. Think China, Southeast Asia, India. They're all going to be using more energy. And population is growing. We're at 8 million? We just passed 8 billion people, and by 2050 we're probably going to have 9.5 billion people on the planet. There's lots of reasons why we're going to use more energy. So yes, we have to use it more efficiently. Behavioral change. So Europe, which has, they're concerned about whether they're going to have enough natural gas to get through the winter for heating and for power. So people are wearing turtlenecks. They're turning down their thermostats. So there's a lot of that. The International Energy Agency has actually built into its modeling some behavioral changes, including like turning down the thermostats, so during the winter. So mass transit, there's a lot of things, we could fly less. There's a lot of things that could be done on that regard. But frankly, I don't see most people, people will do a certain amount of things, but there's going to be limits to what they do. If the price goes up, that forwards, people will then buy more electric vehicles. They'll buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. There is that kind of thing, but it's a slow process. Well, you already had one, right? Or did you already ask a question?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
What you've been talking about are huge sums of money that need to be invested. Who are the primary investors in all this? Are they governments or oil companies? Who's putting the most money in?
Well, if you're talking about oil and gas, it's the oil companies. If you're talking about the clean energy, you need everybody investing. So governments can't do it alone. They can set the rules, and if the incentives are right, you'll get a huge amount of private sector money coming in. There is a lot more private sector money going into clean energy now than there was. Not enough to get us on the path that we say we want to get on, which is holding the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, but there is a lot of money pouring into that space. So the numbers kind of make my eyes glaze over. They talk, we need, $20 trillion over how many years, and I have trouble kind of understanding what that means. So, but it's got to be the private sector's going to have to do it, or else, there's not enough money from governments to get there. I will come back to you if there's not another. Okay.
What about doing more research on the effects of global warming? What if it turns out that rising temperatures on Earth are not so onerous, longer growing seasons? We might have to pay people to move off low-lying islands. The oceans have risen only 8 inches in the last 100 years. The IPCC latest report said there actually are fewer hurricanes now. This alarmism is just alarmism. The only thing for sure we know is the next ice age is not that far away. We're at the end of the Holocene warming period is not that far away. So if global warming staves off the next ice age.
I'm not so sure about this. We're having, weather is getting more and more extreme. We're having droughts. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. What can we do now? You mentioned adaptation. We have to. Adaptation is essential because we're not going to be able, in my view, we're not going to stop at 1.5 degrees. And what countries say they're going to do so far doesn't get us there. And because of the effects that have already occurred, we need to spend money on adaptation, which is going to include a lot of the things you said, but we also have to focus on the mitigation piece. There are some other ideas out there. I could talk about solar geoengineering, things that we might need to try to, limit temperature increases. But yeah, yes, adaptation has to be part of it. Oh, you don't get to ask, do you?
No, but somebody asked about, an energy exporter, oil and gas exporter, or not. But as part of the reason we're still importing is because we don't have the refinery capacity here in the United States. In other words, we have enough oil, but we don't have the refining capacity, so it's actually cheaper to bring oil in from the outside.
Not really. I mean, we do have enough refining capacity. So, not all oils are the same. So I mentioned, somebody asked about, Keystone. So that oil coming down from Canada is a very kind of heavy oil, and refineries particularly the ones along the Gulf Coast, were mostly designed to handle certain kinds of oil, heavier oils. And there are a lot of this new shale production is of the lighter kind of oils, meaning less sulfur, higher gravity, and refineries in the United States most of them are not designed to handle that kind of oil. So it makes more sense to export some of that and bring in other oil. So that's mostly it's a balancing function.
How many refineries in your lifetime have been built in this country?
There haven't been refineries. So there was a problem coming out of COVID, refining capacity, in part because China, which has become a major exporter of diesel, was keeping it for domestic use because they had their own energy issues. This is how these things get all linked. So they were keeping it domestically so that diesel wasn't getting on the market and diesel prices were going up, which has a huge impact on the economy at large because that's what trucks use to move around, goods, and ships use it too. So,
Roger, last question. Just to pick on this gentleman's point about what if things aren't really as bad as they seem, or as some people say, what if they're worse? And you mentioned that the Equinor people do some scenarios around geopolitical implications, and we sort of talk about this as a straight line and kind of, well, all the people who have will continue to have, and all the people who don't have may not get, but otherwise we may be a little colder, but in fact, things wouldn't have to get a whole lot worse than what's predicted over the next 25 to 50 years, when there could be a lot of political unrest, and we talked about hydro and people interrupting the flow of water, et cetera. I mean, there's just lots of situations which could happen.
So all of these kind of scenarios that plot the best way to reduce our emissions in a timely fashion assume good international cooperation, that we're all moving in the same direction, we're all working together in a way that is not happening today. I mean, US-China, among other things, we're not all doing that. So that is a scenario where we're going to spend more money, we're going to duplicate efforts, we're not going to, spend the kind of money that we should be spending on these things. So it's a path towards a using dirtier fuels and higher temperatures. So it's not a geopolitical conflict is not good for energy or the climate, I think is how I'd answer that.
So Doug, thank you for an outstanding presentation. And a couple comments. If you, like I, and there was a question a minute ago about where can we see these slides again, after Tim Williams finishes putting this presentation together, sends it to us, we take a look at it, and then we upload it onto our YouTube channel. You'll be able to see these and stop it wherever you want on a YouTube. And you'll be able to look, pardon me, at each one of Doug's slides where you want, okay? Let me say that the church had a new system put in here, an audio system that put in about 6 weeks ago. And as Tim and I were talking about half an hour ago, his comment was, it's not the microphones, it's probably something to do with the amplifier. I can't tell you any more than that. I'm a civil engineer, not an electronic engineer. So, but anyway, I'll talk to the folks who in the administration here, because they're very responsive. They want to make sure that we're happy. Third is, I should let you know, whoa, I lost, oh, here, before he goes out the door, we lost Fred Langley as a director of our, and a member of our board of directors, because he has a family situation that he has to pay more attention to. So Justin Godshaw, and you probably have seen him over the past years, he's a former member, a former director. He is standing in for him, in for Fred Langley, and he will be running for office for election at our January 19th meeting, as I said. So please join us on January 19th for our annual meeting and for our program. Let me go back. There we go. And for our program on, I'll just leave that there, with Ambassador David Satterfield speaking on diplomacy and global challenges in U.S. foreign policy.
Jim, can I just say, I
Certainly.
know that there have been some questions from time to time on Turkey. There's some interest in Turkey as such an important actor in so many crises, but Ambassador Satterfield is a long and illustrious career in diplomacy, but he was most recently within the government arm the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, and just leaving last year, actually. So you'll be able to talk to him about that as well.
What I'd like to do is give you all an advanced look at what our programs will be January through May. They're portrayed right here. I assume, Tim, that they will be on our YouTube channel if you go to that. And these are the topics that we will have. Ambassador Satterfield. In February, we will have a program on Korea, the future of Korea. It will probably get more specific once I'm able to engage a little more with the speaker. Colonel Jeff McCausland, you've seen him on television from time to time. Initially, when he and I spoke several weeks ago, he was interested, if we were interested, in him talking about the Ukraine. Who knows what it's going to be by the time Jeff comes in and talks in March. But he's so experienced and studied and educated that he could shift from that if that's what we would like. We're looking for a topic that Larry and Roger were looking at to try to find someone to speak on international finance. We've got a couple clues, but we haven't finalized anything yet. I think that would be excellent. And then we wanted James Borton to speak with us in October, but he had to go to Vietnam. So we canceled that one and had another program in its place. And he would talk about in the South China Sea. And I am really impressed very much with his research and studies and his engagement in that area. So that's what we're looking at going forward. So once again, thank you, Doug Hengel, for a superb presentation. Please watch for it on our YouTube channel. Thank you all for coming. Have a happy holiday season. A Merry Christmas. We hope to see you in a Happy New Year on January 19th. Stay safe and healthy. See you then.